Hey, what's going on, weavers? Tim here again, and in this episode we will be making a braided paracord and leather keychain lanyard. We've got this closed loop 4-strand braid that connects to a nice keyring with a hand-tooled leather cover, which I think came out really nice. Also, if you don't have the tools or the ability to do some basics of leather crafting, I'll have a purely paracord version of this keychain in some additional bonus footage I have available to you. So that being said, let's get into it. For this project, I've got my 2 lengths of paracord, a split ring, and later on I'll be using some leather. And leather tools. To start this one off, I'll be passing my blue cord through the split ring and ensure that I have equal amounts of cord on both sides. From there, I'm going to take my secondary color and place the midpoint on top of the blue. Then I'm going to cross the blue cords over, left over right. Then I'm going to switch my grip on the strands so that I have 1 gray and 1 blue in each hand. Then I'm going to continue by crossing the gray strands over, left over top to the right. After that, cross the blue strands over again, left over top right. So you're going to continue this pattern of crossing the blue and gray strands over each other to form your braided section. Keep doing this until you've reached your desired length. For my particular example, I tied about 27 inches or 68 centimeters. I'm going to use some hemostats to clip 1 pair of the cords. I'm just doing this to keep the braid together and keep the strands separate. Next, we're going to splice the braid to close the loop. About 4 braids from my split ring, I'm going to use a lacing needle with the first blue cord. I'm going to follow one of the blue braided strands towards the starting point. Just choose one that lines up best with the placement of the running end. So you're just very simply following a strand of the same color and doubling it up. After that, repeat the same process with the gray strand that's part of the first pair. Again, I just chose the closest gray strand in the braid that flows with the terminal end. These first couple strands are easier to splice, but as we go along, the braid will get tighter and more difficult. You may need to use a knotter's tool or marlin spike to open up a path for your cords. With that first pair done, I'm just going to repeat the same process with the second pair of blue and gray strands on the other side. At this point, the splicing will get pretty difficult to get the cords through, so I highly suggest using a marlin spike to make your life easier. The 550 fit itself will also start to struggle to get through the braid. So what I did was I took my 550 fit off and went down 1 size by this last gray strand, and it was much easier. I also had to melt my cord to a smaller point to be able to attach the smaller fid. So continue this process until you have all 4 cords spliced into the braid. And the end result should look like this, where you have 2 terminal ends on each side of the braid with each of the 4 strands doubled up. When that's done, snip off the excess cords, melt with your lighter, and press down on them and flatten them to lock them out in place. Do this for all 4 strands, of course. With that done, we're now going to make a leather cover. I'm using 4 to 5 ounce leather, and I've traced this shape onto my leather and I'm going to cut it out. After that, I'm going to mark my stitching lines with my creaser. I'm going to punch my stitching holes around the piece of leather and down the middle of the tab. I apologize for not having proper shots of this, as my setup wasn't very conducive of doing so without shaking the camera a lot. Next, I'm going to bevel the edges of the leather, and I think I'm using a size 2 beveler here, and I'm just going to go all around the leather. Then I'm going to thread up my harness needles with some waxed cord. And here you can see where I've punched my holes through. I'm going to add some stitching to this edge here for decoration, but I'm going to leave the top and bottom holes. I'm going to now put my piece of leather in my stitching pony, and I'm going to start my saddle stitch. I'm going to anchor with a single back stitch, so the first set of stitches goes around the first 2 holes like so. Then I start going forward over the initial back stitch. I'm then going to continue my saddle stitch along the stitching holes towards the end. Now at the end, I'm going to finish by passing the strand on the right to the flesh side of the leather. I did this so that both threads finish on the flesh side. To finish those threads, I'm just going to clip them off with my scissors and slightly melt them with a lighter. Now to attach the cover to the braid, I'm going to line up the tab with the spliced section of the paracord braid. And I'm using the same saddle stitch method. I'm going to stitch the leather directly onto the braid. Now this part didn't work out exactly as I hoped. I did this with a snake knot before with no issue, but the splice braid was quite tight, and as a result, it was hard to get the needles through. In retrospect, I should have used pointier needles and not my harness needles. I started from the end of the tab, working my way towards the split ring. Using some pliers made pulling the strands through a lot easier. But as you can see, I'm doing the same saddle stitch as before, but I'm just also going through the paracord. Now this took a bit of a toll on a couple of my needles as they bent a little, but it's okay, I have some spares. So I stitched the tab to my braid, and I have both ends coming out the paracord side, and I'm going to clip and melt those ends where they are. With that done, I'm going to use a bit of rubber cement to stick the back side of the cover to the braid for added security. Just apply a bit of this Gorilla Glue to the leather and paracord, and after sitting for a couple minutes or two, just press them together. I'm actually going to use a clip to hold it down and let it sit for a few hours before I continue. Now to close up the cover. I'm going to get my needle and thread ready again and go through the right side of the cover and then go through the left from the inside. Going to then loop the left side around the front and go through both layers of leather again to anchor my loop. From there, I cross my threads over, and the now right needle goes through the stitching holes from right to left. And the left needle goes through the same stitching holes from left to right. Make sure you don't go through the opposing thread when you do this. Pull tight and then continue this cross stitching going down the seam. Now at the very bottom, I ran out of thread like a leather noob, but all I'm going to do here is cross these strands over like before, and then go through the last set of holes a second time to anchor them down. I had to use this little trick I came up because my threads were a bit too short. Now once that's done, snip and melt the excess threads. Last but not least, I'm going to condition my leather with some Smith's Leather Balm. This is really great all natural stuff, and it will darken the leather, but as it absorbs, it will return to its previous color somewhat. And I'm just going to liberally apply a bit of this all over the leather. So there we have it, folks. There is our braided paracord and leather keychain lanyard. Love the way this one turned out, and if you want to make the fully paracord version, I'll have a link for that bonus footage in the pinned comment and description box down below. I hope you all enjoyed watching this video, and I hope you've learned something or were inspired to create something. And that being said, a huge thank you to all my Patreon supporters. If you want access to exclusive tutorials, as well as our Discord server, feel free to check out my Patreon page, link in the video cards as well as down below. You can join for as little as $3 a month. You can also support this channel by liking the video and commenting. Also, feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out what I have to offer on the rest of my channel.